have to be.
Should I send an
Has to be
email to
fair.
SPS staff because I think a lot of
Okay,
them
I'm
might-
going to begin.
don't
This
do
is
that?
the year of flexibility. 2020.
I am going to call the meeting to order. If we could please stand for the pledge. Mr. Falvo, would you please lead us in the pledge this evening?
Tim, I'm just checking my sound. Can you hear me okay?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If I could ask you now for a moment of silence for our Mary Joan Bauder, who is also known as Joan Bauder, age 92, of Southington, who passed away on July 25th, 2020, at her home surrounded by her family. She lived in Southington for over 50 years with her husband, Robert. She worked for over 25 years in the town of Southington as a secretary at the central office for the Southington Public Schools and for the Youth Counseling Center. Joan was a long-time volunteer at the Southington Community Service, Southington Library, as well as the New Britain Museum of American Art. She will be missed by all who knew her, and she was a dear friend of mine. So a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Now I have, excuse me, approval of minutes from our June 25th, 2020 meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next on our agenda is public communications. Any communications from the public?
If you give me 1 second, Mrs. Carmen.
Sure, I'll certainly take your time.
Check to see if we have any emails. I do not have any emails. As you know, we published on the agenda the opportunity for individuals to send emails in for public comment, and I've received none. So.
You've
none.
received none?
Correct. As of right now, we don't have any.
Okay. Is that Mr. Medancy?
It is Mr. Medancy, yes.
All right, moving right along. Do I have any communications from Board of Education members? Mr. Brown?
Yes, I have several items I'd like to discuss. First, I want to thank all those who planned our fantastic graduation live this Saturday. We called it Groundhog's Day. It was 4 times in a row, and the jokes weren't quite as funny the 4th time, but it was perfect, no glitches. Praise goes to many people. First of all, Frank Pepe, who's sitting with us. Thank you for all the hard work. Tim Cannell, and I know there was hard work you did also, and the other person really is Rich Arroyan, who really at the high school did a lot of special work. Very well organized. Also, Rich tells me that Diane Angelillo and Sherry LaRose, his secretaries, went way above and beyond. So I want to thank all of them, and I do believe Pete Romano, I know he wasn't there, but I know his staff people also, and the security guards did much more than normal. Second, I want to express some serious concerns over several of our plans for the fall school opening. First one is about sports. I believe we need to take them sport by sport, and those that involve too much contact, football and soccer come to mind. I strongly urge us to postpone those seasons until later in the year. I know we are under the rules set by the CIAC, but I implore them to do what most colleges around the country are now doing, putting the safety of our students and the athletes and staff before playing any dangerous sports. In-person classes. Again, I realize we must do what the state and the federal government tell us. What I'm about to say is not meant in any way to be criticism of our local administration. They have worked way above and beyond, and done the best possible job given the restrictions and requirements the state has imposed on us. I implore the state to look at several factors. Our national new COVID cases are still too high. I believe, what did I read today? 1,500 people today died alone. Which was a higher number than we'd been seeing recently. Many schools that did open in person have closed already. Right now, over 2,000 students in Georgia and Florida and staff are under quarantine because of cases the first few days of school. I believe we should start virtually, get the numbers under control, and I'm not just talking Connecticut, because I think we've done a good job here, but everywhere, and have faster testing available. Right now, I don't know that we can test and have results within less than 4 days.
20 minutes.
Then slowly return to a planned step-by-step process. Sadly, I think we will open and then end up closing down in 3 or 4 weeks and be in an even worse situation than when we opened. And I also worry about students who may exhibit no symptoms but carry the virus home to infect parents, grandparents, or other siblings. I am concerned by the large number of teachers who have already contacted us. I can't even keep up on the emails and other staff expressing concern that if we do close, they must report to school to do virtual lessons. All that makes sense for most teachers. There are those with school-age children who will be stuck with daycare problems, the cost, availability, etc. My request is pretty simple. I just hope we can create a waiver for those special cases on a case-by-case basis that have serious daycare issues with their kids. And lastly, I believe the safety of our students and staff is the number one responsibility we have as education leaders. The illness and potential serious health consequences of even one student or education staff person because of school opening in person is our responsibility. Having said all this, I do realize that our economic recovery depends to a great extent on parents being able to go to work and have their students in school or taken care of. I get that. But education, safety, and the economy are 3 separate issues, and our students and staff should not be viewed as economic pawns. Let's work on the child care issues with safety in mind, separately from the education part. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. O'Shannon, do you have a motion?
Yes, I'd like to move that we move agenda item 10A to 7A.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. O'Shannon. Any other communication for board members? Yes, Joe.
So certainly with everything going on, I had a great discussion actually with my brother-in-law, who's on a board of education up in Exeter, New Hampshire. And we had a nice back and forth conversation, and he shared an essay with me by C.S. Lewis from 1948 in regards to living in the atomic age. And if you just bear with me, it's a quick read. In one way, we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we to live in an atomic age? I am tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year, or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night, or indeed, as you are already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented, and quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. We had, indeed, one very great advantage over our ancestors, anesthetics, but we have that still. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances and which death itself was not a chance at all but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts. not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies, a microbe can do that, but they need not dominate our minds. And certainly, if there's any point in history, we're living in it where this certainly pertains. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any other board members? Ms. Clark?
Yes, I just want to echo what Mr. Brown had to say about graduation. I thought personally that the speeches got better. And I think Mr. Pepe got funnier with each speech.
Oh, please.
As did you, Mrs. Carmody.
Thank you.
Your speeches all got better as the day went on. It was a long day, but quite honestly, it was the least we could do for those children.
Beautiful.
Because they deserved it, and I have yet to hear anybody have anything negative to say about it. Dave, you were there too, and it was just a wonderful day, and it was a privilege to be there, so.
You're
thank you.
absolutely correct. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mrs. Clark. Any other board members?
Mrs. Carmody?
Dave,
So I just
sorry.
want to echo what, So I just want to echo what Mrs. Clark and Mr. Brown said about graduation. It was a beautiful day. It was a hot one,
Yeah, I
but
know.
the speeches were great. So I do want to thank Mr. Pepe, Mr. Royan, Mr. Cannellan, and all of the graduation planning committee and everybody who helped put graduation together for those kids. They've had a very tough senior year, and a senior year that they'll never get back. And I'm glad that we were able to have an in-person graduation for them rather than a virtual one. So thank you for everyone who put that together.
Thank you, Mr. Falvo. Thank you. Any other board members? All right, moving on, we have communication from the administration.
Thank you, Mrs. Carmody. The very first one is, not to be redundant, but graduation, we do owe a lot of thanks. There were lots of folks, Mr. Pepe, his entire administrative leadership team. I know Mr. Arroyan worked countless hours on that. The other folks that I would like to thank, quite honestly, are the students and family members. Our students were amazing, and it could not have been all that comfortable for them sitting in the middle of the turf field on a nice, warm August morning or afternoon, mid-afternoon, and then the evening. The evening session was cooler. And our family members were really amazing. Folks came in, they sat, we had the X's on the bleachers. They were appropriately physically distanced. It was just, I think, a tribute to Southington. Mr. Pepe said it well. We have great kids because we have great families. So I'd like to publicly thank our students and our families, as well as all of our staff members. Our second item, I just wanted to give some kudos to our custodial and maintenance crews for summer work. These folks have been working so hard to clean schools, to move furniture, to rearrange things, and are doing a tremendous job. And they're still doing that now. Many of these individuals, in fact, virtually all of them, worked throughout the shutdown, if you will. They were all here in full force through March, through April, May, June. And there were a lot of things that were accomplished. We can give you a list at another point in time. I honestly didn't want to give Mr. Romano one more task to burden him with putting a list together for you right now. But kudos to our custodial and maintenance staff, and I wanted to do that publicly as well. And then to our reopening planning committees, kudos again. The subcommittees totaled approximately 115 staff members, and those are from all areas of employment. We had certified staff, we had non-certified staff, we had administrators. It was really wonderful that folks came, gave their time, and put in the work that they put in. And everyone was very, very serious about it, very positive, really trying to contribute and make sure that the planning that we did was as good as it could be under the circumstances of actually not receiving a plan from the state. Sorry, I just had to put that in there. And then the last item, we're gonna test our Microsoft Teams, and Mr. Medancy's a remote communication here to talk about Coalition for Social Justice. So, Mr. Medancy, think you can do that one? Yes, you can speak.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Yep. Before I just want to make sure folks can hear me. If you can give me a thumbs up, if you can hear me okay with the mic turned over there.
Hang on 1 minute.
Can you hear me, Tim? Now.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn you up a little. Okay, go.
So regarding the Coalition for Social Justice and the Community Conversations, we had the second of 3 conversations yesterday afternoon from 4 to 5 o'clock. We had 60 folks attend, which was a nice turnout for that conversation. And, you know, the goal was, you know, elevating people's level of racial consciousness and having conversations about, you know, your own level of racial consciousness and what, through your journeys and experiences, brought you there. Mr. Brown was one of our speakers, Lauren Johns, a parent of ours, and 2 of our students, the Singh brothers in grades 7th and 9th, were 2 student guest speakers who did an amazing job. I want to thank Christina Sims and our community outreach subcommittee of the coalition for their work on this. We would have never been able to continue with these conversations and recover plan at the same time simultaneously. But I think it's important that we're doing both right now, given the situation we are in as a nation, that we continue to have these conversations. So just want to thank folks for that. And our next community conversation is next Wednesday at 4 o'clock. And we've extended the time from 4 to 5:30. It seemed like folks had a lot they wanted to share yesterday afternoon, so we've extended that. And we hope to have a good turnout there as well.
Thank you, Steve.
And that is it, Mrs.
That
Carmody.
concludes your report, Mr. Kennellan?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right, and now we moved item 10A up to 7A, and this is going to be the administration providing us with an overview of our learning plan. Before we do begin that, and Mr. Kennellan goes over that, I can't even begin to express the gratitude that this entire community should feel for the hours and hours of work that all our central office, all our administrators, and so many people that I couldn't even mention them all. We have a plan. It is a plan that we are going to do our best to implement. We hope that people will find it, that they will accommodate by it. We are doing the very best that we can. As you know, the state changes its mind from day to day. This is the plan that our administration has come up with, and I will now turn it over to Mr. Kennellan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Carmody. I would just like to say a few words, and then I'm actually going to ask Mr. Medancy. You all have it in front of you. It's on the portal. Some of you have it in hard copy. And I think rather than try to do a PowerPoint presentation, we thought we'd just walk through that, answer any questions that folks have. I know that you've all looked at it.
Yeah.
So I can't say enough, and Mr. Medancy's not going to like me saying this, but I can't say enough about the work that
He is done.
that Steve has done in this. He's lived and breathed this literally for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so that's why I think it's only fair that he gets to talk about it a little bit. And I think we're all clear on the fact that changes continue to occur, and we are under no illusion that this plan, which we've labeled, 2.0, is going to be the last one. In fact, who knows what tomorrow may bring, as they say. The next governor's news conference, the next thing that changes, the next set of guidelines. We continue to get new guidelines from DPH, mostly welcomed, quite frankly. They've given us some very, very, very good information recently, which we have been able to use. But those change on a daily or weekly basis. So this is certainly not going to be the last, but I think what you see here is the core, and we're just going to keep trying to work to improve that. Now, Steve and I spent about 4 hours today with staff, elementary staff, middle school staff, high school staff, and then special education and support services staff, listening to comments, questions, and we collected all those questions. There were some that we couldn't answer, just simply because we ran out of time in the Zoom meetings, and that we are going to get answers for staff for. And then there are others where we simply had to say, look, we're waiting for additional guidance on that. And as soon as we get that, we obviously will share that and disseminate it. So we continue to work on it. I don't think this is going to be anywhere close to where we're going to end up in a couple of weeks. And I do think the changes that we've made already and the changes that we're going to see going forward are positive ones. And the bottom line is that we're trying very, 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 very hard to make sure that this is safe for everyone involved, for all our staff and for all of our kids, most importantly, and our families, because we know our kids do go home to families. So that's our goal, to try to do what we have been directed to do in a safe way, and make sure that our students get the best education that we can offer them under the circumstances that we have.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but Mr. Medancy is having trouble hearing you. I'm trying to see if he's asking if I might be able to call him and through the audio, because he can't hear through the mic, and I'm not sure that the audience that's listening to the live stream can hear everything.
Yep.
He's struggling because he's trying to hear it from, okay, he's got the live stream now, so he can, I think we're better.
You good, Steve?
Okay.
Let's see. I'm gonna turn it over to you right now anyway.
Okay.
You okay? Okay.
So I'm actually, I'm listening on the live stream.
Okay.
So now I can hear the audio, Tim.
Okay, so I am going to turn it over to you, and is that the board's preference? Do you want to walk through this section by section, or do you want to start with questions? How would you like to do it?
I think I like a walkthrough. I think that's-
You want to start with questions?
No, I think a walkthrough would be great. 'cause
Okay.
then we
Walk
could
through
address
process.
the
Why don't you do
questions
walk
real
through
time.
first, Steve, okay? Can you hear us? Steve, you want to do a
Oh,
walkthrough
it's
first?
probably a lag time. It's probably a 5 or 6 second.
Yeah.
You hear me?
He probably does. It just takes a while for him to get it.
Yeah.
Just walk through. You just want to take it right from the beginning and walk through?
So there's about a 15-second delay. So everything that you're saying and I'm saying is coming through on the live stream. Okay. Yep, I can hear you. I'll do a walkthrough. And I'm going to mute. I'm not going to be able to hear my... Yep. There's a lag time. You're correct. All right, hold on one
There it
second
is.
here. Let me mute that.
Add a little levity to the situation.
Okay, that's better. I shut off the live stream. That was terrible. Okay, so let me pull up the plan here. I mean, I could hear it, but I could hear everything after the fact when I'm hearing you in real time at the same time on Teams. All right, so as you go through the plan here, it's broken out into multiple sections. So I'll skim through, what the sections are quickly, and then I'll go through some major points of the plan for folks in terms of things that we've emphasized with staff. I'm sure that Tim probably in his prelude to this presentation, just shared the gratitude to all of the staff and administration that were part of this process. And through our conversations with staff today as well, we had 608 staff members hop onto 4 separate meetings today at elementary, middle, high school, and then special education and support staff to hear more details beyond this plan in terms of context for them as teachers and staff members. And to try and answer as many questions as we could for them, with the understanding that there are many questions that, you may answer one way today and the answer could very well change tomorrow, could even change by the end of the meeting tonight. And so it is a very fluid situation, but with iteration 2.0 here, we can very much expect an iteration 4.0 or potentially even a 5.0 by the time school opens. That's how much information we're continuing to receive and how often it is changing. So we will communicate updated plans to families as that occurs, and we will highlight changes within the plan so that they don't have to search for them and look for them every time there are changes if they've already reviewed this initial iteration. With the daily operations, some of the questions and thoughts, and at the top of page 2, there's about a couple bullet statements that approximately 2 weeks prior to the first day, we'll post information regarding arrival and dismissal procedures, hallway travel, and such. And that's very unique to each building. You couldn't capture that for every building within this plan because we know the vintage of buildings, the size of buildings, and the amount of student population, including factors such as the amount of drivers versus who will be attending on buses. All of those details will dictate and finalize the arrival and dismissal procedures. Additionally, folks have said, well, what is a mock-up of a classroom layout? And again, that really depends on the amount of students that are going to show up in person and what the size of that cohort looks like, because if we have more opting out, then we obviously can create greater social distances within the physical layout of each of our classrooms. We are always going to maintain or try to maintain as much as 6 feet. That's the gold standard, if you will, the optimum. Recognizing that we may not meet that gold standard in some instances, but the American Academy of Pediatric guidance says it can be as little as 3 feet as long as folks are wearing masks. They have to be masked up if it's within 3 feet is the guidance. So it's that range that we're looking for, but we're trying to maximize to every extent possible in every situation possible. Some of the main mitigation strategies you'll kind of see embedded within this, there's no one strategy that is a prevention strategy. It's not just social distancing, it's not just masking, it's not just frequent cleaning, it's not just ventilation, it's not just cohorting, and it's not just taking your temperature in the morning. It's when taken in whole, all of these procedures can reduce or mitigate the transmission. But at the end of the day, we know that there are going to, potentially still be transmissions. And so one of the benefits to cohorting, again, it won't prevent a possible transmission within the community, but it allows us to accurately trace or track possible exposure of students who have been maintained as cohorts. So that grid on page 2 kind of summarizes that piece. A note for folks, and it's been a topic of debate, but our legal counsel has been very, very clear about this. The face coverings or masks that are required, they are required to be worn during the school day. If folks refuse to wear those masks, it becomes a health and safety issue. And at that point, our legal counsel says we could potentially remove them and place them in a remote learning environment to maintain that safety standard as dictated by the state. And so that's something that we'll be working closely with our students and making sure we have mask breaks for them, and that we're very aware and conscious of temperatures in classrooms should that become uncomfortable. And really working closely within there. You can see there's a link to talk to the students about mask wearing. And as Tim has talked about, trying to coach our students to gradually begin wearing them if they haven't been wearing them at all this summer, so that it's not such an uncomfortable shift to their new normal. Relative to the cleaning and sanitizing, this is an area that we expect to elaborate further on when we get more guidance from the state regarding certain areas of this section of the plan. But everything in here is taken directly from the governor's what we call the AAA plan. Adapt, achieve, and advance is what the 3 A's stand for. But it's these are the best practices, the requirements, and many of the considerations that we talked about within subcommittees that contain members from all bargaining units regarding some of the best practices and some of the optimum strategies we want to use to maintain a safe learning environment for our students. Lunch procedures, again, that's similar to classroom setup. That'll kind of be dictated by the size of the lunch waves. It'll be determined based on the data of how large the cohort of students is that are returning to school, so that's a fluid situation as well. But our staff, our administrative teams have already worked to talk about how we could maximize what is the occupancy, considering the distancing, because it will need to be 6 feet if we are unmasked to eat. And so that's the standard we're striving for, so we may need to use multiple spaces. For instance, at the middle schools, it may be the cafeteria, the media center, and the band room simultaneously, so that students are spread across 3 locations but appropriately distanced. As we go down further, we go into transportation. Based on our current numbers, and you see that we highlighted that so we can at least provide that indication to parents that we are beginning the school year in low status. That's based on current health data. We will work with the local health officials and understand the health data if it shifts, and communicate accordingly if there's a shift to a different transportation status. So the details around the transportation are highlighted within that plan. Students will wear masks, and we do have procedures for loading and unloading, but there's not necessarily complete restrictions as if we were in a status where we had to take more stringent precautions if the numbers were to increase. The monitoring health piece has been something that we had just literally received the night before releasing the plan to families, so that's why we kind of had to delay it and then go back and incorporate that within the plan. And a lot of folks have talked about, so what if? This is not a complete iteration relative to monitoring health. We just finalized the procedures for the nursing and health room today when there are suspected cases of students that are either symptomatic or may have been exposed, and that will be communicated in our next iteration of the plan. But the matrix is fairly straightforward in terms of the event, the testing's results, and then the isolation or quarantine protocols associated with that. And that's not something that's a local health decision. This was communicated down by the Department of Public Health. And so this is the standard we're using, relative to that situation. The instructional models. This has been extremely difficult because, I completely understand the governor's intentions on allowing families the choice to opt out, but that creates a fluid situation with staffing and scheduling, with cohorting. So we need to survey our families. The goal will be to send out a survey tomorrow that we can provide our families several days to ponder their decisions and try and begin providing us with data that we can use to start to form what will be the final iteration of our opt-out model, if you will, how it will be staffed, what the day will look like. The goal is to maximize synchronous, which is like that live real-time instruction whenever possible, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But we also need our families to understand that if they're opting back in, it can't be something as simple as tomorrow you can arrive, because we do have to follow health and safety protocols and procedures, and that may require some lead time to coordinate that transition back into learning environment. Everything in terms of the size of the cohort now, the physical distancing or layout in the classroom, and then the academic needs or emotional needs of the child upon reentry, especially if they hadn't been with us since March. And we want to make sure we orient them to the live learning environment, similar to what we plan on doing for all students upon our return in September as part of our phased reopening. Another portion of the plan beyond the opt-out, where you can see there are some sample schedules there that were shared with parents, and you can see it does make for a longer day and than what we had in the spring, because that involves more synchronous instruction. But again, that the actual details of what a lesson will look like, there'll be a combination of live instruction along with guided and independent practice accompanying. So they may not actually be on the camera for direct instruction the entire 46 minutes per se of a lesson. That live lesson might last 25 to 30 minutes, but it might be accompanied by assignments done during that time while the teacher is present, so that they can assist students who may have questions or needs or look for feedback. A big concern across staff today for sure was who makes the decision about what model you'll be deploying and when, right? And how does that happen? Again, we refer to the Department of Public Health guidance. As Tim has said already, and I apologize, Tim, if I didn't catch this at your prelude, but we're not medical professionals, so we rely on the expertise of the medical professionals to make these determinations. So the matrix you can see here was provided directly by the Department of Public Health. What I will share to date that we know is our declaration of a full in-person return for the elementary and middle school. If you look at the matrix, it says a number of 10 to 25 cases of positive COVID cases on a 7-day average per 100,000 people is the threshold that would warrant potentially a shift from full in-person to hybrid. As of the last data set that we reviewed, we are at in Hartford County, we are at 1.6 positive cases per 100,000 students, or not students, I'm sorry, people in Hartford County over a 7-day average. So we're not close in terms of a hybrid to a full remote and using this matrix and threshold. There are secondary indicators, the percent positivity rate, the number of new COVID-19 hospitalizations, and the COVID-like surveillance, and those are metrics and indicators that will be posted and shared with districts regularly each time they're updated. In addition to that, it's not just the Department of Public Health data, it's also your local health data, because the matrix I just talked to talks about Hartford County and the regional health data, but we also know you may have an outbreak in a community and your local health data may look different than your regional health data, which may warrant a different decision than what's dictated by this matrix. And lastly, for us, it's the size of our cohorts again. So we may not have up to 10 cases, if you will, per 100,000, but if we can't adhere as closely as possible to all of the recommendations for mitigation that are within the governor's plan, then that may compromise our ability to provide full in-person instruction because we obviously don't want to pose further risk to students and families in doing that. With the learning models, the full in-person learning model, that it won't look like it did before we closed in March. The full in-person model is the understanding of all the students who are opting in, if you will, for lack of a better term, but attending daily with the appropriate procedures and protocols that we discussed earlier in the plan relative to the operations portion of things in place. In addition to that, when you talk about the hybrid model, that is the most difficult model for the district, believe it or not. It may not seem that, but that is the most difficult because now we have, in a sense, not families that are opting out, they're opting in half time. And so you have teachers who essentially have two classes within a class. You have your live, in-person, real-time class, and you have your remote learners. And it's tremendously difficult. I mean, look at tonight, this evening, with all of you, to tend to a live audience and also tend to your remote audience simultaneously. And so we really need to work hard to make sure that we're equipping our teachers with the appropriate software, things like microphones and sound and internet access and device access. We also need to make sure our students have device access. If half of them are going to be home on any given day, and we want to provide synchronous instruction, they need to have a device readily available for when their scheduled class is going to be taught. And if folks are sharing devices, which is a problem we were up against in the spring, and I have a third grader and a fifth grader in my home, they might not both be able to get on that one device at the same time when the teachers are providing that synchronous instruction. And I'll speak a little bit more about some of the challenges with the hybrid momentarily at the end of our overview of the plan, specifically around cohorting. The high school, Tim has been, very out front with this since the beginning of our entire conversation around return and recovery, specific to the governor's guidance, which essentially we know based on the population and the infrastructure and the academic programming at Southington High School, extremely difficult for an in-person return. And difficult isn't even the word, not possible. We hashed it out every potential way. There are just simply too many students and not enough space to appropriately distance, and so we plan on starting with a hybrid model there to reduce that population density and to allow for the high school administration and teachers to appropriately adhere to all of the mitigation strategies that we're going to be employing. And so a huge credit to all of the high school members, the faculty, and the administration for working through this model. And again, we'll talk about the cohorting in a moment because that continues to be a challenge that we're thinking about as we program. Full remote, I don't want to say this is our best case scenario in terms of being ready for it, but I think we learned a lot in the spring about what went well and what we could build upon and improve upon. In addition to that, and I'll leave it with a big if we are able to make sure that all of our students have device access and internet access, if we can have that in place, we have provided our staff with professional development in the spring. We've provided staff with optional professional development all summer, and we plan on providing with further professional development upon our return here in August. So our staff, I will tell you, based on the conversations Tim and I have had with surrounding districts about their readiness and their software and their staff aptitude with the software to deliver remote instruction, I'm incredibly proud of our staff and how much they've learned in a short amount of time. It won't be perfect. We're going to all be learning as we are now today, with some of the modes of instruction, some of the tools, and some of the advantages to some of the software versus others. But we did a lot of training sessions. I want to say it was 166 remote training sessions in the spring that were all recorded. Staff was all mandated to attend, and they did. And participated, and we want to build off of that right away upon our return in the fall once they actually have class rosters and curriculum that they want to start to embed in their virtual classrooms. And then one piece that I think we just didn't have established and we weren't very just ready for when spring distance learning was thrust upon us was the learner expectations for students. So now your new normal is learning from a computer at home. So what does the school expect of you? Teachers always do a great job at the beginning of a school year establishing their transitions and their routines and their expectations and their norms and building that classroom community. They didn't have a chance in the spring to do all of those things in their virtual community. And so we've talked a lot about that this summer and how in the spring, in the fall here, early on, it'll be most important if we have an opportunity to have students in person to really acclimate them to both their physical classroom community and their virtual classroom community. That may mean exposing them to their digital classroom, some of the software and tools that may really heavily depended on parents helping the children navigate with when they were home in the spring, with parents themselves not all having the background in many instances. So in addition to having these expectations conveyed to students, we plan on offering training sessions to our parents and also to our childcare and daycare providers so that whoever a child may be with, there's a level of assistance that may be afforded to a child, at least more so than what we were able to provide in the spring in terms of preparation for what a remote model might require on the home front. Athletics, I won't spend a lot of time on. You understand that's an absolutely fluid situation. It changed again this afternoon with some recommendations that the CIAC are currently reviewing. So I'm sure Mr. Cornellen and Mr. Risser will keep the board up to date as that continues to change and evolve over the next probably week to 2 weeks. Clubs and extracurricular activities, a piece of feedback we got from parents was that their kids, if we're socially isolated, can we at least run virtual clubs and after-school activities to give kids not just that dashboard when they're front and center with a teacher getting direct instruction and completing classwork and asking and answering questions related to curriculum, but some of the things that we always did, a stock market club, a Lego league, some of the things that I remember, some of the clubs that we had, the environmental club that we had when I was principal at Kennedy, and many of the after-school clubs, I know you know, DECA, FBLA, all the clubs like that that exist at the high school, can we still meet virtually and allow those kids to have those social interactions where possible, if not in person, virtually at the least. And so that's another goal around this. And the last piece, and it says before and after care program, but we're working really closely with community agencies, the YMCA being one of them, because we already have an established relationship. They're already licensed in our buildings. But I'm also working with Joanne Kelleher in the Early Childhood Collaborative and she met yesterday with all of the child care providers in town, both the daycare centers and the private home health daycare centers, to assess what do we have available for seats and ages of those seats so that we can provide that information to our families, of both staff and families in the community, because we do know one of the outcomes of the spring closure being so sudden and families keeping their children home with them, that we lost several businesses that provided childcare. So what we had for seats in the spring, we don't have right now, and that may pose a challenge for us very shortly. The calendar is at the end of this plan. I'm going to let that speak to itself. It is a separate agenda item, so we'll take that up separately. But I also want to elaborate on what's not in the plan about what I'll call, and I just typed up for myself, for my own personal notes here, just some quick things that we had talked with staff about today and that we know that our parents, are still going to be waiting for information on. The primary concern, if you will, right now is device access and deployment. While we certainly put our order in the spring in for Chromebooks to go one-to-one, so did every other district in the nation, other than those who were already one-to-one. So we understand that there may be a back order, so we're not certain when those devices will be delivered. So we are already, obviously we need to have a contingency plan for that. What do we currently have for inventory? We will be building into the parent survey how many devices do families have, how many do they need. So if we can use existing inventory coupled with what families may already have, we can get through that very temporary time period until the devices arrive and they're able to be deployed. That's not just a vendor issue in Southington, that's state level information we're receiving in terms of the size of the back order and the timelines associated with it. So almost all districts, unless they were already one-to-one prior to the pandemic, are in this same boat regarding that. Additionally, a huge challenge for our administrative and office and clerical team will be developing cohorts of balanced sizes to the best accessible extent possible across all classrooms and sections in the entire district, and keeping siblings attending whenever possible on the same days. Certainly at elementary and middle, and if we can on the high school, but as you know, the high school has a rotating schedule and kids have all different schedules, so it's not as easy as just dividing kids up alphabetically. You may not have balanced sizes, which may challenge some of the distancing measures that we're putting in place. But when that survey comes in tomorrow, you can bet we will be watching it very closely right up until the time the survey closes. We will probably have to follow up with families who may not be able to respond to the survey or be aware of it and get their intentions, because the size of and the intentions of folks determine a lot of the outcomes here relative to the opt-out model and the cohorting that we create. So that's, I mean, to talk about a time crunch, that's something right now that everyone is eagerly waiting so we can get going with that. Additionally, as I alluded to within some of the remote learning and hybrid learning plans, ensuring that all of our software and hardware is in place to appropriately equip our teaching staff to deliver quality remote and synchronous instruction, providing our staff and families with the child care. Integrating guidance, this continues to be a challenge for us that I think Tim alluded to during his prelude. Integrating guidance that's either just received or yet to be received from the state right up to the start of the school year, and how fluid that becomes. So that's where I kind of alluded to back. Each time we have a new iteration of this plan, we'll integrate that new guidance into it, and we will alert families to that update and highlight where the changes or the new information is so that they're able to stay current as our plan evolves. Some examples of information that is either yet to be integrated in any level of detail because of either a lack of guidance or we literally just got it last night is specific really to special ed and preschool. Those are two areas that we just recently received guidance, and we're working right now to get that synthesized and integrated into the plan. Another huge challenge for us, obviously, will be staffing positions where a teacher may be unwilling or unable to return with and filling that with appropriately certified and qualified staff here at the 11th hour. Some may be put in a position where they have to make difficult choices around if they can't find childcare or they're hesitant to place their child in childcare, and we're in a situation where we're full in person and we have 80 to 90% of our families saying we intend to return. There may not be enough remote teaching positions to allow them to do that from home and tend to their child care needs. And what we've also said is even tending to their child care needs from home, if our expectation is live synchronous instruction and live engagement and accessibility to our students and families during the day, that's going to be a challenge from home when you're trying to tend your own children at the same time. It's such a reality that our staff face that I don't know that any district has the solution to, other than we're trying to work closely to provide childcare options to our staff, and we will be communicating what we have available to families as well, and ensuring that that's a safe arrangement if they choose to go that route. And then lastly is finalizing our teacher assignments for the opt-out students. It's essentially like we're going to be given a roster of brand new students to the district next Wednesday, and we're going to have to assign them to a virtual school, classrooms, and staff their teachers, and staff with teachers within a short amount of time here prior to the start and opening of school. And so, as you can imagine, everyone, our entire central office, our entire administrative team, and I'll tell you, all of the bargaining units, their executive leadership boards, and all of our subcommittee volunteers have all been working all summer to work towards this iteration, but in addition to many other details that aren't necessarily completely related to the learning plan for families and staff, but also to employees and outcomes relative to their job. So it's been a monumental task, and I will tell you our plan is far from perfect. There are certainly things that we wish we could do differently or better, but we will continue to take feedback from staff. Clearly, with 608 staff members hopping online today, second week in August, and taking the time out of their day to be part of the conversation with us means that they have a vested interest in what this looks like, and they're equally concerned, but eager to help our students and make sure that we give them the best possible experience. That is all I have.
Well, what an excellent job, Mr. Medancy. Boy, so much to digest. How you could do all of that and remember all of that. And I'm sure we're going to have board members with questions, and we'll get to that in a moment. Just to understand that we are doing the very, very best that we can. And we thank the staff, and so many people for all that have been done. So thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm now going to, if Mr. Kennellan will allow me, I'm going to ask board members if we have any questions or comments they'd like to make. Bob?
Yeah, I have
If
two.
I could just ask one question, if Mr. Cannellan is able to, you don't necessarily need to see me if you can hear me.
Yes.
And so if it's okay with you, if Mr. Cannellan can repeat the question from the board member to me, and then I'll be able to answer. If he can't, we'll tag team this one.
Yep, we can do that.
Perfect.
Okay,
Thank
Ken?
you.
Go ahead. Bob?
Yeah, I want to reiterate what you said about the hard work. I do have a couple questions. First one is, we had talked about a high school model where the 1 through 4 would go to school, 5 through 8 be home, and then flip it. What I'm reading is that's not the one we're doing,
Correct.
because that did have a large bus cost, I know.
Yeah, the question was about the flipping, the split day model at the high school. Yes, in working with the high school administrative team, I tell you, the job that they have done is amazing. They have turned over every rock, piece of paper possible to try to make it all fit and work for students. We really liked the split day model, which brought every student in every single day for a portion of the day. But the major drawback there was not the cost of transportation, although that was a drawback. The major drawback to that is that the shortened periods reduced the amount of instructional time.
Okay.
And that was a significant concern for our staff members, because and so consequently, the recommendation is the every other day model. The every other day model is not going to be easy to implement. I mean, we're trying to solve the problem of what to do with lunch. We're about 150 student seats short, and one of the things that Mr. Romano is doing for us is investigating whether or not all of the available canopy type arrangements have been acquired by local restaurants. There are also issues with regard to restrictions placed on that by the fire marshal. A certain size, you need a building permit. But all of those we can work towards if we can do something along those lines. Because if we can't do that, then Mr. Tubby and his staff are going to be forced to use the East Gym, or part of the East Gym. So then you're running into conflicts with physical education when the weather's inclement, so to speak. So the model that's in there now is the side-by-side. It is the every other day model. And I guess the one good thing about that is it eliminates the discussion about transportation, which, as Mrs. Donnell can attest to, was difficult, to say the least. We're talking about $570,000 or $580,000 if it ran the full year, which I don't believe it would, quite frankly. So that's really a non-issue, because also the efficiency of a midday run would have been crucial, and we would still have to provide virtually all of the runs, and we're a large community in terms of the square miles. So it would have been a couple of weeks before we were able to smooth that out, and it just had the potential for not working well for kids, whereas this one maximizes the instructional time that's available for students. It still has other issues that we need to smooth out.
I have a second one, which is, I think, an
Hi,
easy
Bob.
one.
Go right ahead.
On the buses, I know it talks about mass, et cetera, and distancing. Is there someone there monitoring the kids, or is that the bus driver's responsibility, or?
So we did talk about monitors. I'm actually going to flip that to Mrs. Danello for a moment. We're back and forth on that.
Yes. So right now, as we worked on this plan, we had multiple committees set up overseeing this, and Mr. Romano was leading the committee in regards to transportation that a number of people participated in. The conversation right now is we are waiting to see what the ridership numbers look like once we see the survey, and once we have a better idea of the number of students that will be on the buses, there's consideration that there may be a need for a monitor at the elementary level for maybe the first 2 weeks of school, to kind of just set up the procedures and the practice and get kids accustomed to the onboarding, the offloading, what that looks like, and the social distancing requirements on the bus. If it turns out that the ridership numbers are extremely low, that may not be necessary. But at this point, we're only really having conversations about the elementary level.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to add that in our original survey, the trend was at about 50%. And now we're going to, of course, be releasing the second version of this survey and asking for more definitive information. I would guess that we're probably still going to be at about 50%, which of course provides more room on the buses. In the hybrid model at the high school, I haven't even spoken with Mr. Pepe about this, so he's gonna look at me as if I hadn't spoken with him about this. But there may be the opportunity for additional student driving for those students who
Oh,
can,
yeah.
because there's a limited number of parking spaces, even with our new addition in the parking lot. So those are serious considerations. And for individuals monitoring the buses, we're talking about how we might be able to flex existing staff in order to do that. A bus monitor position is virtually impossible to staff. Having been there, done that in previous positions, they come, they go. They're not high-paying positions. They're never filled. It's very, very difficult to do.
Just a side note to that, have we thought about potentially reaching out to some of our families and seeing if there'd be a parent that'd be willing to sign up for like an hour? Because I would imagine that would take like an hour or two.
To sign up as a monitor, or are you talking?
No, correct.
Well, the position, first of all, the monitors are typically employed by New Britain Transportation, although New Britain Transportation doesn't necessarily want to do that in this instance, and that's why we talked about existing staff members,
Okay.
which we think we probably have a better
Existing staff members, our staff members, or
Correct.
their staff members?
Correct. Ours.
Our staff members. So the liability concerns, the background check requirements, all of that, especially if we're only looking at a 2-week window that we might need monitors. We're going to try very hard to look at our existing staff members from a variety of groups. We haven't had those conversations yet. We're really waiting for the survey results to help us determine what that would look like, and maybe just extend their day a little bit longer by being on the bus.
Any other board member questions? Mr. Darrenowski?
I think the presentation, and I think the plan is, I tell you, top-notch. I will agree to that. The concern I have is, what is the cost? And, you hear the stories about the federal government that first they're gonna fund it, now they're not. The state doesn't have any money. We're getting ourselves into a situation here where, we're going forward with this perfect plan, and we may not have the money to do it.
So let me repeat that to Mr. Medancy, and then we'll talk about that. So first of all, Mr. Darrenowski complimented us on the plan. He thought it was top notch. You got a thumbs up from Mr. Medancy, Mr. Darrenowski. It's a little like being a translator, I guess. And his question is, what about the cost of the plan? So we're going to talk a little bit about that now. Of course, our existing staff are our existing staff, and we're believing all hands on deck. Well, we're not going to know what else we need for staff. We believe right now that we absolutely need to bring on additional custodial staff, and we know we need to bring on additional nursing staff or CNA somewhere in that neighborhood. And I know that was a topic of conversation in the Finance Committee meeting, right? So we'll talk about that for a minute. We've eliminated the big piece of the transportation. There are some software pieces in there, and for some of those, there's also trade-offs. For example, Parent Square, I can let Mr. Medancy speak to that, if you would, because that's sort of a key piece for us. Want to talk about that?
Sure. Are they able to hear me okay? Yes? Okay. So Parent Square is a tool that we learned about. As we know, one of the challenges here with not having that daily access to families is communication, both for teachers as well as the district, especially as information could emerge quickly and things could change quickly. For instance, if it's a really warm day in the elementary schools and we need to call an early dismissal, we currently have mechanisms to do that, but this is something where we can do it through different modalities than what Parent parents are used to, like a phone call, which is what we currently do. There are ways that we can send out push notifications to families. Another feature of that is we can translate whatever we're pushing out to families in up to 100 languages. The parent on the other end selects the language they wish to receive the notification in. The governor was very clear, so was the commissioner, that the plan should be devised with equity and access in mind. So not only device and network access, but access of information. In addition, we used Google Voice in the spring. Our teachers did. They relied on that heavily to reach out and communicate with families back and forth. That, as with all software, was free in the spring. It was like the old bait and switch, and now here's the cost. Well, Google Voice is not something, Mr. Darowski is spot on, that we have funds set aside for, and we're not willing to pay the fees that Google Voice is asking. Whereas Parent Square, there are features where the teachers can communicate directly with families and vice versa, both individually and as a class. We can also do e-signatures, which will be important for things like user agreements relative to the devices that we're giving. We can collect e-signatures from families and different other information that we provide regularly as part of our annual notifications. Things like residency verification forms and whatnot can be uploaded onto Parent Square. You can poll and survey families, which we're using a Survey Monkey and pushing out a link through School Messenger, kind of a little bit of a workaround to what we're currently doing. Some districts just use Google Forms, but the feedback we got, we spoke with a neighboring district yesterday about the product, and it does take the place of several products we're already using. So although there's a cost, it's going to be an offset to some of the products we're already using. So it's not absorbent by any stretch. But there are other tools. For instance, if GoGuardian, if our students are at home, our teachers can't see what's on their device, on their screen. So if a student has a question about what they're looking at, whether it's a sample of student work or whether it's something they've typed or written, our teachers with GoGuardian can simply click on that student icon and that student's computer screen pops up, and in real time they're looking at what the same thing the student is looking at, and they can have that live immediate exchange. GoGuardian, as we know, is also our web filtering tool. So if we're in an in-person and students have their laptops up and teachers standing in front of the room 6 feet away, to follow that appropriate social distance, you can't see what students have up on their screens. This prevents them from having things up on their screens that they shouldn't have. But in addition to that, the teacher, because of the teacher dashboard, can shut down something immediately that shouldn't be up on the student's screen, and would be notified by that. We're also talking about a product called ClassLink. We use so much software right now. One of the things we heard from especially the families of our youngest students, was how difficult it was to navigate from either site to site with several different sign-on and password types of mechanisms, all not universal by any stretch. So that what we can do is students can use one sign-on, one password, hit one icon, and all of the different software tools we use appears right in front of that family without having to navigate through the different ways that they're all asked to do that. And lastly, Google Enterprise. Google Enterprise is Zoom for teachers at the end of the day. It is the virtual meeting tool. It'll allow the students at home, some of the upgrades that they're doing with Google Enterprise, which are great because they alleviate a lot of the concerns. It blurs out the backgrounds of students' homes, so all you can see is the student face on it, but you can't see what's in their background. Additionally, it allows breakout rooms where students can collaborate in small groups. It allows teachers to, in real time, when work is submitted, to know whether it's authentic work or it might have been taken from another source. Google's using their old algorithm mechanism to do that. And then many of the features in Zoom that Google didn't have, that many of you, if you're engaging in corporate meetings using Zoom, the raising of the hand, the muting at once, the exiting of folks from the meeting, the starting and stopping of the meetings only when the adult is present, and supervising the users, within that particular meeting link. That Google Enterprise integrates both with our Google Classroom and the Canvas learning platform that we use, so it also allows us to record lessons. So in the event that we run into device access issues, we can record lessons and they can be accessed at a later date for students who can't live on synchronously in real time, or for folks who might simply be either working or taking care of younger siblings, or some of the realities that we've faced beyond device access in the spring related to the pandemic itself.
So, in terms of this, some of it there will be an offset because we'll stop using things like School Messenger. That'll offset some of that. Some of it we'll be able to use some grant funds because there's some parent engagement, piece to that. and we've got estimates on these costs of the products, and we're gonna juxtaposition those against the reductions that we would have if we didn't use some of the software pieces that we're using. And in addition, we did just receive word today, interestingly enough, that we're going to hear from the state what our appropriation is. And it's still part of the Corona Funds Relief Act, separate from the CARES Act dollars. We're going to hear that tomorrow. We don't know what it is. We submitted a fairly large number to the state. The state asked for an estimate of our expenses around this.
Says dog.
The state asked for an estimate of our expenses, and they asked for the estimate of the expenses in mid-July. Now remember, we just received their guidance at the end of June. So we sat down and we went to work, and we looked at how many students we might have online, not returning to us, because we know staffing costs are significant. And the dollar amount that I calculated that based on the number of students at about 50 teachers. Now, I don't think we're going to need to hire 50 teachers, but that was $2.65 million, and we submitted that to the state. And we submitted the additional costs for the nursing, custodial, software. We submitted everything because we wanted to be on the high side, as opposed to being on the low side. That doesn't mean that they're going to give us dollar for dollar. Right now, we won't know until tomorrow what they're going to give us. They're going to give us something. We just don't know what that will be, and then we'll be able to apply that against some of these costs. And I know I try to do it in a general way because I know in Finance Committee talked more specifically about it, and I think when we get to that portion of the meeting, we can lay out what those costs are exactly, or at least specifically anyway.
Okay, are you done? No, you
Well,
still have some more?
I mean,
Go ahead.
I'll tell you, it's great, again, and I really appreciate Mr. Manansky's detailed overview of what all this stuff is. I think it's great to have. The bottom line is, we've got a plan in place. I don't think we know where we're gonna go with the plan. I mean, this is what we're gonna work with. This is our approach.
Well, we know the plan that you have in front of you is going to change in iteration. I mean, it's going to change in iterations, but it's going to change incrementally, for example, based on additional guidance that we get from the state. But this is the not just the basic outline of the plan. This is fairly far down the road.
But the school's gonna open supposedly in 3 to 4 weeks.
Correct.
We don't have, I'd like to know what we have in place for 3 to 4 weeks. Where are we gonna be? And what the cost is gonna be. Are we gonna be able to open school and
Yes.
be in the hole by $3 or $4 million?
No,
The board wants to be in a position that we're gonna be in that kind
I really don't think so, and I think when we get to I don't want to preempt the Finance Committee discussion, because I think that's part of the Finance Committee discussion in terms of those costs. There certainly are going to be some costs, but I seriously doubt that we're going to be in the hole $3 or $4 million.
So,
So if you could wait until we get to the finance report and see if those questions, because I have Mr.
Okay, but
Falvo.
then my
that I-
question is, the discussion at hand right now is the opening of school, which is what we've been discussing.
Right, but I think, if I may say this, I believe when we get, it's unknown at this point, but I think when you hear the finance report, that some of it will be explained to you a
Okay.
little bit better, Mr. Darrenowski.
Then we're gonna go back and have this discussion again? Maybe we should have
No,
had
I
this
didn't
discussion
say that.
after we had the finance meeting.
I said that I believe that the finance report will, and Mr. Oshana, correct me if I'm wrong, it will give you a bit of an explanation of some of the expected or anticipated expenditures that we may have. Correct? Correct. Nothing is definitive at this point, Dave.
Mhm.
Nothing is, okay? As Mr. Kennellan said, we do not know what's coming from the state. There's a lot of unknowns right now. a lot of unknowns.
Then one other simple question then. Do we have another meeting before the opening of school?
If we what?
Do we have another meeting before the opening of school?
I don't know, do we? I don't think we do.
You don't have another one
No, we
scheduled,
don't.
no.
No,
We could always add one.
we could have one,
Right.
Dave, we could have one.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You know,
Yeah.
we have this meeting, the discussion, we moved this up in the agenda, which is fine.
No, we could.
My question is, how are we gonna afford it? Now you're saying, well, we're gonna stop this discussion, now we're gonna go back and discuss the finance committee. What we should have done is had this after we discussed the finance committee for the finances.
So if I could just interject, so Dave, I think it's important for us to actually know the plan as it exists right now. The state of Connecticut can make a change tomorrow and add another $500,000 bill to it.
I
So,
agree.
so I think this was more as an informational, this is the 2.0 plan, and then I think we'll go into the finances, because I'm just as curious as you are. I just, again, I know that we had a couple discussion points on the finance committee, and then there's a couple things on the docket that we need to sort of
All right.
bring it
well,
to the
then
board.
I'll
So
wait.
I
I'll
think
have
we
the
got
same
this.
question.
We'll get through it.
So we're gonna move on with, I have Mr. Falvo with a question. I don't know if Mr. O'Shea had a question. We'll go to the finance report. I do not believe we have a meeting scheduled before school begins, but if we feel that it's necessary, we will indeed schedule one, okay? Mr. Falvo.
So I have a couple questions. The first question is actually from Mrs. Cipriano, who texted me. I believe Steve said there was a plan to contact families that did not respond to the survey. Is that correct? If parents do not respond to the survey by tomorrow, will the district reach out to...
Yeah, correction, the survey hasn't even gone out yet. It's not parents responding by tomorrow. The survey's going out tomorrow. Parents will respond by midweek next week. Once that comes back, for those families who have not responded, the individual schools will have those names of the people who didn't respond, and they will reach out to them, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify
Yep.
that for her. Thank you. So my question. So I know into the plan, and this was in the AAA plan as well for mask breaks. Mask breaks sound all well and good when you can go outside and it's nice and sunny out. What is the plan for mask breaks if the weather does not permit for students to go out? And how long would these students be outside having mask breaks, and how often throughout the day?
Okay. Did you hear that, Steve? Okay. Would you care to answer that?
So obviously, Dave, you bring up a great point. Mask breaks are a lot easier when the weather is going to cooperate, and we do know that mask breaks will take away from instructional time. That's not something that's avoidable because there are transitions and routines associated with the mask breaks. In terms of how long, I think a lot of that depends on the age of the kids and then what the environment they're in. If they're in an air-conditioned middle school environment taking a mask break, they may not need to be out there as long because the classroom environment they're in is a conditioned space. And whereas if you're in an elementary school and it's a warmer setting, you may want to provide for a longer break. We've also asked our teachers where possible to consider where they could educate outdoors and do things, small group lessons and whatnot in the outdoor space. So I think that's kind of a strategy to incorporate mask breaks where possible into the school day. And in instances where we can't go outside, the administrators are looking for what are the common spaces that they can appropriately socially distance the students at the 6-foot level, similar to what we'll do with the lunchrooms, so that they can unmask. But that'll be weather contingent. That'll also be location contingent, depending on the layout, the vintage of the school, and the age of the students.
And we've also been promised some additional guidance. DPH just said that Monday in their call that we'll get some additional guidance on masks themselves and on mask breaks.
And my second question, and more of a concern. So 2 of our elementary schools do not have AC. Typically in September you can get 90-degree days, and even though if Mr. Cannella, if you do call an early dismissal, being in the building even just for 4 hours in the heat wearing a mask, that's going to be miserable for not only the students but the faculty as well. And my question is there actually, and when when it's that hot, there's not going to be learning taking place. So is there a plan in place if there is, say, there's a heat wave in September, 80 to 90 degree weather, will we, for those 2 elementary schools that do not have AC, will we have remote learning because of the heat? Because the last thing we would want is from students or staff to suffer from heat exhaustion.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, and I know Mr. Medancy is raising his hand because he wants the answer, but we have 8 elementary schools, none of them have air conditioning. We have some,
None of them do. Okay.
none of them have full air conditioning. We have some elementary schools that have it in some areas, such as a lunchroom, et cetera. But the 8 elementary schools, including the 5 that were renovated, do not have air conditioning all the way through. Okay, so Mr. Medancy.
There's also, as part of a recent webinar that I had just watched literally this morning around ventilation systems, there was also a statement around the OSHA developing regulations relative to indoor temperatures when mask wearing that districts would be expected to, follow. Am I optimistic that we'll get that regulation by the start of school? No. Does that mean that we then use our professional judgment to do what's best in that situation, given the information we have that day? Similar to what we always have done on heat days. Now there's just another factor that we have to consider more closely, that what might have been a threshold for an early dismissal in the past may actually lower in terms of temperature now that masks are in play as well, in order to call that early dismissal. And potentially, if we know of an extremely hot day coming, yes, we will have to question whether it's smart to even bring students into school at all in an instance such as that, David.
So, and I've actually said that, I think, in each and every one of my communications. So it's not only early dismissal, but it's the possibility of saying we just can't do it in person that particular day. Now, there are a lot of factors, just like there are on any other weather-related day, that are involved in that. It's knowing ahead of time. We try to do the very best job that we can to give parents as much information about what we're thinking ahead of time, because there's planning that goes into place for daycare, et cetera. So we're going to follow that same path. We're very, very cognizant of those issues. And in fact, as some of you know, on some of the really warm weather days that we've had over the last 4 or 5 years, we have our custodians go in and take the room temperature several times a day and report those back to us. And then I also have several friends who are teachers who happen to be on the second floors of elementary schools, and they cue me in on what the temperature is in their room on a pretty regular basis. So we're pretty sensitive to that, and we know that learning isn't taking place if it's so hot that people can't even stand it. So we're prepared to do that. We're also hopeful that we'll have less of that because we're moving the school year start back a little bit if the board approves that calendar. So all of those things are considerations, and we're trying to be really sensitive to all of that all at the same time. I will say that we might be better equipped now. If you look at some good things that come out of a bad thing, we might be better equipped to go to a remote learning day than we probably would have been last year or the year before.
That's true.
Correct.
Thank you.
Are you done, Dave?
I am.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Mr. Shan, I believe you had a question?
I have a couple questions. In terms of, I want to go to the attending grid, and it talks about when you go from low, moderate, and high, where it says favoring remote learning, moving 25 plus cases per 100,000 population. What is the region that we're looking at there? Is that Southington?
It's Hartford.
North, right?
It's by county, so it's Hartford County.
All of Hartford County.
Correct. So, Steve, the question was on the grid under attending. Yeah. So it's Hartford County, but DPH is very quick to explain why, because we're all saying, wait a minute, Hartford County, we're going to be adversely affected by what happens in a large city. They had to go with the county model because there are variations that occur as you get smaller and smaller, and the rapid oscillation of that is possible, especially when you get to really small towns. So they went by the county model, and also community transmission doesn't actually know what the town borders are.
Right.
So that's why they're looking at it. But they were also very, 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 very quick to point out that local conditions play an important aspect or an important role in that. So it's a combination of that county data and then your local data. Ours happens to be good, and I was on a call with our health director, which we do every week on Tuesday, and I think we had only had 2 cases in our health district, which is Southington, Plainville, and Middlefield, all of July. So we're in pretty good shape, so you have to take that into consideration. But even with the health district, Bristol's in a separate health district, right? Meriden is in a separate health district, Wallingford, Cheshire. So we pulled together with superintendents, assistant superintendents, all of our health directors at one point in time a couple of weeks ago so that we could have a common understanding and a common language as well. So we're trying to work as collaboratively as possible with all that. But the data that's going to get published is going to be the county data.
And you also then in the what happens if you have a positive test or you're near someone that's positive, you list the protocols of how
Yep.
you go about that in the process. Who's the central point of contact tracing, or is there going to be a central point, or is it school by school?
So the question, Steve, is a central point of contact tracing. We only provide the information. We provide, if you have a case or a reported case or a suspected case, the very first thing that we do is we call the health department. Remember, it's a public health emergency.
Right.
Everything runs through the health department. So if it were me, for example, and you were the principal of the building, Mr. Oshana, you would call our health department and say, I just had a staff member, he reported a positive test, the case may be, and then you would get your direction from Mr. Oshana. Except the way we run it here is that we run everything through Mrs. Passamano. She is our liaison, so it has been a single point of contact for those situations. And then the health department basically says what you should do, whether, what type of quarantine, whether you should shut down, et cetera. Now, we also understand that DPH DPH, by the way, has been great. Once they realized that we really needed their help, they, of course, have an interim commissioner right now who runs two agencies. She's the commissioner of another agency at the same time. The previous commissioner was encouraged to go elsewhere. And the person who was really supposed to be the educational liaison left her position right at the very beginning of this, claiming that she had been harassed, et cetera. So they really had a difficult time with leadership. They didn't know, the interim commissioner did not know that the plans from school districts had to be submitted to the State Department of Education on the 24th and hadn't been brought into the loop. So Mr. Lockwood, along with the health director in Wallingford, have been very, very instrumental in communicating with the Commissioner of Public Health. And we're starting to get some very specific information from them. In fact, the chart that you see in here is something that they didn't know they were being asked to provide that, but they did. The next piece that they have indicated they're going to provide to us is more specific, which would get to your question. So we're going to wait for that. We're going to wait for their guidance, but if a case comes up, we're still going to be calling our local health director, who's going to be providing direction, so to speak, on how to implement that guidance.
Because one positive case can lead to tremendous impact on either a school or the entire district, right? Because you have families on buses, and I'm going to one school, you're going to another school.
No question about it.
That's a big unanswered question, which
No question about it.
for a while.
Correct.
Last question. Teachers. So now, we're getting ready. Is it 3 weeks, 3 weeks till school starts? So they're going to end up going in, getting their rooms set up, starting to organize the classrooms, put together. And we're talking here about desks facing forward, having the social distance, getting rid of all the furniture and unnecessary stuff in the classrooms, monitoring the distancing. I'm curious where the teacher's responsibility starts and ends versus where the custodial and getting the room set up, marking off the distances, moving the desks, setting up the classrooms and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Sorry. Question. You couldn't hear that? You couldn't hear all of that. So this is all about room set up and teachers going in and getting ready their room set up, and where the line of demarcation is in terms of responsibility. And I'll answer to the best of my ability, and then I'll allow Mr. Mediancy to add to that. Our custodians have been moving furniture around continuously, not just to get the buildings clean, but to help with the room arrangements. I mean, for example, Mr. Torino and Mrs. Vitkevich and the custodians in the building went to every room. They counted the numbers of students in the particular cohort, removed the desks that weren't going to be needed in order to staff their labs, you know, so that they can move the lab tables out and have individual desks. So that type of effort is replicated. Teachers typically go in and set up their classrooms. Now, no one is going to say, you know, Mr. Oshana, you're a classroom teacher, you need to move that bookshelf, right? Thank you.
Or desks, or.
Those are the types of things that we do have custodial maintenance workers for. So but again, that being said, we're all trying to do this together. We have teachers who've been begging to get into their classrooms, you know, to set their rooms up. And I think there's a certain amount of that's going to happen. Teachers, just like teachers like to have their, previously, the kidney-shaped tables, and they want to move them in certain places. The custodian brings them in there, and they go ahead and move them anyway. So we're going to get some of that, and I do think that we just all have to continue to try to work together on that. But we certainly don't want people who are, you know, going in and moving a lot of furniture around themselves. Mr. Medancy, you're raising your hand. Okay.
So, in addition, you know, I can tell you from experience and during my years as an elementary principal, the custodian is not proud of anything more than the new shiny buffed floors at the end of a long summer, and they do not want staff dragging furniture around that ruins their masterpiece. They work really hard to have the building shiny, clean, and you know, sparkling for the student arrival to make that a proud day for the students. And in addition to that, the one thing I do think we have to keep in mind is our teachers pretty much packed up and left on March 13th, you know, when things were normal. So for the teachers, a lot of the time we need to provide them is really to kind of look through what student work that they weren't able to send home that maybe is no longer relevant to send home, and purge that, you know, paperwork and things like that, sending on to the next grade level things that would normally be part of a student portfolio, organizing their own instructional materials and supplies. You know, they pretty much left as it was, hey, it's noon today, you know, at the end of the day today, you're not coming back on Monday, so take the things you think you're going to need in the event that we happen to close for an extended period of time. So our teachers really are going to need to almost close out last year's classroom and get ready to open their classroom at the same time. And we know our teachers, they'll hang displays and, you know, visual aids and whatnot in the classroom for the students, and so they may rotate seasonally what they put up in their rooms, especially our elementary teachers, to do that, you know, the welcome back bulletin boards and doorways and all that types of stuff. So there's that kind of process and time that's needed for our teachers because they didn't get that closure in the spring. But by and large, the furniture, Mr. Romano and the crew already knows some of the key items that universally we can remove from rooms that will automatically create the space we need, and that stuff has already been underway the past month or so.
And if I could I
Mrs.
piggyback on,
Clark?
it's a continuation of Mr. Oshana's question. I don't mean to jump in front of anybody, but that line between the teachers and the custodians, I'm thinking specifically of the middle schools and the high schools. When classes change, who's going to be responsible for the cleaning of the classroom? You know, and I know there was some concerns that we had gotten some emails from teachers regarding the cleaners that we use and the speed of how they work. So
The green cleaners versus the heavy-duty.
yeah, I mean, things that
Mm-hmm.
the green
Been there.
cleaners are not known to be as quick as, say, commercial cleaners you could buy, like Lysol or something along those lines. So my
I
question
remember
is,
having a conversation.
when are the teachers going to be cleaning in between classes when the students leave? Custodial, how is that all going to work in the individual classrooms?
Sure. So, Steve, the question is about cleaning in classrooms, and, okay, you heard that? So, you know, again, we're still trying to work on that, and we're working with the SEA on that. When students are in their same classrooms, then are not going to be changing classes, it doesn't really apply.
Right.
When they're not doing it. That's part of the whole cohorting piece, and the classes all get cleaned at the end of the day. Certainly in all the schools, the high contact areas, the high touch areas get cleaned on a continuing basis, the bathrooms, and then when everybody goes home, everything gets cleaned and disinfected. And part of the reason for the additional custodial services is the ability to do more of that during the day. Now, ideally, I would love to see the opportunity, and this is just an example for the high school, all the classrooms have spray bottles of cleaners. That's one method that we talked about. If in between the classes, a classroom teacher can just spray those desks and the students could take a paper towel and wipe those down, that would be a really easy way to do it. The students could be assured that they would have a clean space. The discussion about the green cleaners is interesting because if you all remember, the reason that it was the tools for schools, they went to green cleaners because of reactivity of students and staff who had asthma and other conditions. So there's this whole mythology around green cleaners, quite frankly, that they don't work as well, they don't kill the germs. We didn't invent the green cleaners. The list is from the EPA approved list, which comes from the State Department and is the Department of Public Health. So I even got an email that said, what scientific proof do you have? The data sheets, they didn't come from us.
The
So-
CDC website has 492 cleaners that are on it.
Right. So,
Yeah.
but we are continuing to look at that because, quite frankly, I think all of us are concerned about that. I am not exactly a germaphobe, but I do wipe things down all the time, as do many of us. So we're continuing to try to work that out. I don't know that I have a final answer for you on that. It definitely has to be a collaborative effort, and we continue to work with the SCA on it. It's part of our discussion every time we meet with them, and we meet with them on a weekly basis. Steve, do you have anything you want to add to that? No?
Okay, Mr. Bezeski?
Joe, just
Joe.
Joe's fine. So a couple things to add on. So bringing up the masks specifically for the elementary schools. Just have quickly going through the CDC website here. Have we thought about or been entertaining the idea of potentially using face shields? And the only reason that I say that is especially with the kids probably up until 3rd or 4th grade. Again, sort of building vocabulary and everything else, it's important for them to see the teacher's mouth, to see how to word things. If that may be a workaround, and that would actually be a better option for students, because honestly, the face shield, even in a hospital setting, is a lot more tolerable than having something constantly on your face. So is that something we looked into at all, or?
Yep, Steve, the question is on face shields. Yes, and all of the above.
Okay.
And again, and it depends on the situation. They don't provide quite the protection.
I understand that, but
Correct.
also too, again, to back that up, kids under the age of 10, again, like the COVID infection rates and everything else, there's statistical correlation of kids tend to be a little bit safer with it. So,
Well,
God forbid.
that I'm not going to debate you on, and I'm not going to get into the debate about it.
Right. But what I'm saying is,
Right.
What's the best way to educate kids?
Yep.
And, certainly covering up our mouths. That's our nonverbal cues. We talk about emotional intelligence all the time. You can't tell what people are thinking sometimes when you're covered from here down.
And that's, for students, that's what you're talking about. We're also, we actually also purchased some masks for staff members that are clear. A portion of them are clear. So we're cognizant of that, and I don't think that we are not open to anything. It depends on the set of circumstances.
Right. Okay. So, again, just sort of keep that in the back of our heads, because I really do think that may be a better option for, at least for the younger students. The other thing, so devices, I ended up buying devices for my kids at the end of the year. I know a couple other families that ended up purchasing devices, so I'm not super concerned about Chromebooks and my kids being able to get one per se. But would there be a way or an email that our IT department can put together to essentially have all the downloads grouped on one email to then be able to get our kids' devices ready for essentially like all the links and things that we could sort of pull from? Like I could set up my kids'
Yep.
computers and have all the applications ready to go on their desktop.
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, it's about devices that parents own for their students
Correct.
and having the appropriate links or things that are sent so that you can prepare those. Yes, Mr. Medancy? Yes.
Yeah, and ClassLink may help us to achieve that. I'm not sure if it's something that needs to be installed on a district issued device, or if it's something that can be accessed from a device to allow, similar to what we talked about earlier, Mr. Pachewski, with all of the exactly what you talked about, all the sites your kids are frequently visited sites, but also our teachers as part of their training and their digital classroom is to create all of those sites or browser links as, you know, within the sidebar or somewhere on the homepage of the student's virtual classroom, so that they can at least get them from that location. But as you know, it brings you to a site and you still have to sign in with whatever mechanism that is. But the hard part about IT doing it is all students literally use different software depending on some of the special programs they have. You know, if it's SRBI that they're getting, you know, additional reading support, or grade levels. But I think by grade level and with what we can do with existing software, it's you know, your request is definitely noted, and is something we planned on trying to do, because we know the parents especially had to assist their children a lot in the fall, especially our youngest students, with accessing some of the software that we're using.
I'm a pretty good IT guy, and I was floundering many a day trying to figure out which links to go. So that's great. And then I just had two other quick things. So as far as so I just wrote down quickly staff issues. Now, part of the concern was some of the teachers who have their own children, but then the concern was essentially like if we, for whatever reason, have to go to a remote learning situation again, what happens with them, or was it childcare issues?
Yeah, so you're essentially referencing the emails that the board has been receiving from staff members. If we go completely, I'm just repeating it for Steve's benefit. If we go fully online, what happens? So there are two things, and again, we're working with the SEA on this. You know, nothing is set in stone with regard to that. But the bottom line is that it's not the buildings that are closed; it's the students who are not there. And so our buildings will still be open, and we have good bandwidth. We have a strong network.
That was my next follow-up.
Right, and some of our staff even asked last year if they could come into the buildings because that's where all their teaching materials were, you know, and use the networks. So the idea behind that was to have staff be able to do just that, and we talked with the YMCA because they are already our collaborative partners. We already have before and after school programs in our buildings. Our buildings are already licensed for that. So the idea was really to try to work with them and create a service for our staff members that they weren't forced to use, but to have it there available so that if folks needed childcare, it was there for them. And that would be for any of our staff, regardless of whether they lived in Southington, didn't live in Southington.
Okay, and then I guess my other thought process with that is there any way that we can offer teachers the opportunity, especially if they don't have students in the classroom, to essentially be able to bring their kids to work with them, because they're going to be secluded in their own classrooms? Is that something that we can?
So we talked with the SEA about that and with staff members earlier today, and we're open to talking about individual sets of circumstances.
Right.
And
Right.
it
Without
is
saying it, there's flexibility to be able to.
it is situational. That is correct.
Okay.
A couple of statements I made together with staff today. I was a little unhappy with some of the emails that I got. We thought we were doing such a wonderful thing in trying to partner with the YMCA.
Right.
And I think there was some misinformation out there, and we got some emails that, you know, people weren't happy and said, well, you know, it's actually not something we have to do. We're trying to do it to help staff.
Right.
So this whole thing is literally to try to help staff. And we've indicated today in our meetings with staff that we're certainly open to sitting down and talking about certain specialized circumstances. And we said that with to the SEA as well.
Okay. And then I promise this is my last point. I know I'm full of hot air today.
have one. Would you hurry up?
I'm
Mr.
so-
Bachewski, I thought you said you had two questions.
No, I said a few. I said
Oh, a few. Okay.
So last but not least, and I saved this one for last because I feel like this is going to be a powder keg, but with sports. So I thought it was pretty funny listening into, the DPH had a press conference today after CIAC announced that, okay, we're gonna move forward with fall, and then the DPH was like, wait, what? So, my thoughts, so I'm looking at it two ways. So, here we have one of the major things that our students partake in that actively sends them out of community. And if we're trying to, we're worrying about cohorting and everything else, I don't know, and I think this is something that we really need to do a little bit of soul searching on. If we just make the executive decision as Southington, listen, you guys could practice together, you could scrimmage together, but ultimately you're not, we can't have you guys going out to different towns. And that's more for the safety of other students, other families, and everything else. So I know there's gonna be tremendous amount of pushback, but that's something that we really need to talk about. Because quite frankly, CIAC, they could talk all they want. Again, if we're gonna do this right, we're gonna do this right. And but I think that's ultimately the option that we're gonna need to be really focusing on.
So, can I just comment on that? So, Steve, the issue was about sports, the CIAC decision to move forward, and the DPH comments with regard to that. My recommendation, no pun intended, is to let that play out for a little while, because I think, in fact, tomorrow morning, within our health district, we're meeting to talk about it. We're meeting with the health director, town managers, superintendents, and I belong to the Hartford Area Superintendents Association, and that literally exploded today via email communications between and among us. So my guess is that by Monday, it's going to be in a very different place than it is today. So I think we should
Well, but regardless, it's
allow
one of those
that.
things where, like, even
Yeah.
if CIAC held that and DPH was like, okay, I'd still say, like, as
We shouldn't
Southington
be
Public.
making a
Yeah.
decision.
I don't think it's gonna be, there was a problem with the health department's report getting to the CIAC in a timely fashion.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It was supposed to be delivered on Tuesday. It wasn't delivered until this morning or yesterday, whenever it was. The bottom line was whoever is in charge of the CIAC was on the 5 o'clock news tonight talking about the fact
Right.
that the cover said it's a very fluid situation. In other words, I think they're gonna backpedal because they didn't have the
They better.
report before they issued their,
Well, but even ultimately, we're responsible for our kids.
Yeah,
so,
we are.
So
you're right, we are.
if I may,
I have a
Well, it's
question.
the final
I wanna
decision.
get a
Does the
question.
CIAC make that decision, or is it a local? If the CIAC says go forward, does a locality have the right to say?
I just think we hit it.
yeah, we can pull we could pull the plug on that.
That's a very
Right.
important statement to make.
Yes. For purposes of clarification, one of the communications I received today indicated that the CIAC had all of the same information that was in the letter from Department of Public Health. They had it verbally and asked the Department of Public Health to put it in writing, which the Department of Public Health agreed to do, and then the CIAC did not wait for that before having their vote today. So I think that just complicated the situation.
I have a question. Is it all right if I call everybody?
No.
Just thanks.
Okay.
I second. I second.
I'm only gonna be 1 second. Mr. Cannellan, I'm a little confused. Most of the time I'm confused. Will there, at any given time, be a large number of kids in the cafeteria at the high school?
They are going to be spaced out, and I believe is Mr. Pepe still here?
No.
Okay, he left. So what they worked on literally was achieving that 6 foot distance. So there will be students in the cafeteria, but they will be spaced out.
And we certainly can't social distance them in the cafeteria.
Well, they're still going to do the 6 foot distance is mandatory.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
But doesn't mean everyone who's having lunch is going to be able to have lunch in the cafeteria. That's the point. Because
Yeah, I
you're
know.
thinking about
I
the,
know. Okay.
the Cecil B. DeMille production that is the typical lunch at the cafeteria. It's not going to look like that. It's not going to look like they have to use other spaces.
But there will be a large group of kids in the caf.
Yeah, and offhand, I don't.
Talking
I don't know what the, what the number is once they measured it out to achieve the 6-foot difference.
That has been a
6 foot.
concern, and
Mhm.
I just didn't know how to answer that.
I speak to
Mhm.
the
Because at
school,
one
just to
time,
give her idea.
one time we did talk about,
Yeah.
unless I have a memory loss here, we did talk about bringing the food to the students. That
Correct.
became something we couldn't do, correct?
Well, yeah, again,
It
that,
was
that
kind
was
of-
when we were talking about the grab-and-go lunches, et cetera. And I think Mrs. Danello had something to add to that.
Sure. One of the other committees we had was in regards to food service. So I had the ability to have conversations with administrators at every level, elementary, middle school, and high school. And so I think a visual is helpful to understand what they're looking at in the middle school's cafeterias.
Right.
And I think they're considering something similar at the high school. So if the table that Mr. Cannellan is currently sitting at was a cafeteria table, there would be an individual that would be sitting on one end, an individual at the other end, and one individual on this side of the table facing the same direction with a smaller table, or if you imagine a desk, it wouldn't be a desk, but some type of like TV tray concept, small table in front of them. So you'd have 3 individuals sitting facing the same
Okay.
direction as per the guidelines, and that is how they're looking to space out in that specific area of the middle school. And I
Only
know
because
Can I,
school administration's
been
been
a lot
part
of
of that
concern about that.
conversation, and
can I also point out that the plan we're looking at has half the students in the school at a
I
time?
know that. I
So
know
you've
that.
already cut the number in half.
I know that.
And then you got the ones who don't
Still a
show up. I
concern.
mean,
Okay.
and you've got
Doing the
different
best we
rooms, too.
can.
There's
I
more
got
than
it.
half.
Okay, moving.
I still got some
I'm James. I'm sorry.
All right. So I mean, I do like Joe's idea with the face shields. By the way, I thought that was a fantastic idea. That's obviously not my question. So my first question is, as far as tech support issues with students that are going to be working remotely via hybrid or full time. So let's say their computer breaks down or they're having trouble with the software. What's the plan to get that fixed, and what happens with the downtime? I mean, does that count as like an absence from the school day or something like that?
Could you hear that, Steve? The question is, what happens what about tech support for students if something breaks down or there's a problem with the software? What's the plan for that? But the second part of that, I'm going to answer. The second part was, does that count as an absence? Which of course it would not
Okay.
count as an absence. But do you want to take that first part?
So, Deb, we have some devices, like the older MacBook Airs and former lease devices that teachers had used, that we can use as loaner devices if we need to troubleshoot something. And that's similar to what we had to do here in the spring when families ran into tech support issues. We had a phone number that they could call, and they would set up an appointment, bring the device down to the technology department here, and we'd either swap them out, give them another device in real time if we had that readily available, or if not, we would work on that device and get it back to them hopefully within the next day. One of the challenges in accessing devices remotely is obviously if it's not our device, we can't access their private devices, but we could provide technical support, with anything that we just at least have the technology means to provide support with. But in addition to that, a challenge could be the administrative passwords that are required. Like, students can't just download things sometimes, and so we push that out. That's the mobile device management software that we have. And a challenge with that, obviously, is we need to have that installed on our devices to be able to do that. So part of it sometimes might just be something as simple as updates, but if the kids are running into true technology issues because the device is malfunctioning, then we often will swap it out through, just like I said, an arranged appointment with central office and doing a swap out.
The other thing to add to that is that, correct me if I'm wrong, we did have a system that was put in place by a technology department, so families could contact them directly, and sometimes it was just a talk-through issue. So we had a little bit of a tech desk, if you will, for them.
All right, so just a couple more quick questions. As far as those, again, working either hybrid or opting out, is the school system planning on providing any kind of take-home books or consumables for kids in elementary and middle school or anything like that?
Okay, so Mr. Medancy, the question is, for those participating in hybrid or opting out, is the school planning on providing other types of materials like textbooks or
Consumables.
consumables? That's
Yes, pretty much what we it's similar to what we did in the spring. We had the math workbooks. The students, the teachers were directed to send them home with the students, because if we do, there in instances, and if you had children in the district that didn't have those workbooks home, you would understand how we had to then rely on PDF documents and printed copies and whatnot. But we also had to use software like Kami and others that you can manipulate PDFs on a digital device. But if we can, I'm almost feeling like I can see Mr. Oshana right now, even though I can't, where we can send books home and print materials. We will certainly do that so that they're not entirely consumed by the device. When I talked about a synchronous lesson that would rely somewhat on that direct instruction digitally, that's where I also alluded to some of that guided and independent practice. And so where we can make print materials available, especially like consumables, I think, Ms. James, you bring up a great point. They don't all have printers at home, and this was a concern we talked about during the budget process. That with consumables, we can send them home pre-printed and bound, and students would have access to the print material without having to rely on a printer. Most of us buy a printer, and then the ink cartridge costs more than the printer does when it's time to replace it. So a lot of families have a printer for a little while and then don't.
All right, thank you. So last question, hopefully a quick one. I think, what do we have, how many students do we have attending, like 6,000 students in our school system?
Yeah, if you include our pre-K, we're about 6,200, a little below that.
Okay, so I'm looking at that matrix, I forgot which page it was, but on page 11 for the attending, where it gives you the low, moderate, and high for what favors, or which numbers favor hybrid or remote learning. And so, you look at like 25 plus cases per 100,000 population, right? Are we looking at those numbers and making a decision based on county numbers, or are we looking at the percentage? 25 out of 100,000 is equivalent to about 1.5 students for our school system for favoring full remote learning. So if we get 2 coronavirus cases, are we planning on going to a full remote learning model?
Okay, so Steve, the question is about how this the chart under attending applies locally. So the short answer to your question is we're going to work in concert with the local health department and the Department of Public Health. And the data that they're providing is the county data. We do have to take into consideration what we're doing locally. So I don't think we have a set number, such as it's 2 students or 3 students. We are continually getting updated guidelines from the Department of Public Health, which we like. I mean, for example, if our county data was low and all of a sudden we had a spike in Southington, it would be the local data that determined what we did with our schools versus the county data. That's why there has to be that.
But are we looking at that local data from the perspective of our students or the town, like everybody in the town?
It's community transmission rate.
Okay.
Right.
That's it.
That it?
Yep.
James, are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't
Sorry,
mean
you
it to
can't see
sound
my
that way.
face.
Are
I
you
took a
done? Are there
shield.
any other questions?
No, I have no other questions.
We're going to move on, but Mr. Dancy, again, excellent job. Thank you so much for all the information, you and Mr. Cannellan, and for answering all of our questions. This is a lot to digest for all of us, and there are a lot of unknowns, and there are a lot of things that are just not definite right now, so we'll do the best we can. Just know how much we appreciate all of the work that has been done. We're going to move on now to our Finance Committee. Mr. Shanna?
Okay. The Finance Committee met Monday of this week. In first item on the agenda, we talked about self-insurance, and the claims for the Board of Ed through the end of June were running about $2.5 million below what was budgeted. And the reason for that primarily is because of the COVID-19 crisis, where people were not having their medical procedures done, we're not having operations done, we're not going to the dentist and having procedures. Expectations are we'll see those next year. Those expenses are going to show up next year. Fortunately, the fund reserves are in a position right now where we believe that would be there's enough in the fund reserve to be able to cover these unforeseen, unexpected expenses rolling into next year. I'm going to go a little bit out of order based on our discussion from earlier. I'm going to move down to the discussion of the financial update. And I'm going to ask Mrs. Zanello to go over the information. We've been over a lot of financial information, and I think this is going to be covering some of the questions associated with the school reopening and some of the expected expenses, as well as the non-lapsing.
Sure. Thank you. So first, I shared with the committee an update on the closeout of the 2019-2020 school year. We are anticipating, or at the time of the meeting, we are anticipating an ending balance of about $2.1 million. As you know, the Board of Finance had approved our 2% statutory carry forward line item for the non-lapsing account. So that amount is $1,963,000 that we will be able to take from the current, the surplus from the 2019-20 budget and put into that account. And we've made it very clear throughout the beginning of COVID that we will be needing to utilize that money for a safe reopening of school, as well as some of the compensatory services that we needed to take care of with our special education students. So that would have left a balance of about $200,000 that would go back to the town general fund. You heard earlier from Mr. Mediancy today that we have not received the Chromebook order. Therefore, I had a $400,000 outstanding purchase order. And the way the town handles that, because we did make a commitment to purchase those, is that we would close the year with a $2.5 million balance. We will be requesting of the Board of Finance at their meeting in September to carry forward the $400,000 specifically to pay for those Chromebooks. So that would be a separate carry forward line item in addition to that 2% statutory line item. So the bottom line is that $200,000 would then go back to the town general fund. So the good news is, in regards to the conversation we're having with these very large expenses in the opening of school, is how are we going to fund all of these unknown items, and as some of these staffing items become clearer to us. So what we do know, and what you will remember, is in June we had the CARES Act, what the state is calling the ESSER funds, and we utilized that to pay for the other half of the one-to-one Chromebooks that we were purchasing. So those funds have been committed. We are working quarterly, submitting expenses with the town to FEMA to see what reimbursements we may have under COVID relief with FEMA. And in addition, we now know that there will be additional dollars coming to the district through the CARES relief, Corona Relief Fund, I believe they're calling that now. So we actually heard today, as Mr. Cannellan had said earlier, that we're anticipating the actual breakdown of the dollar amount that would be coming to the district tomorrow. And then they'll actually open up a grant application at a later date so that you can tell them how you're planning to utilize those funds. So and I think what is playing into how I do not believe they are utilizing that money and appropriating it out in the same way they did the CARES funds. That was basically done on a Title I allocation to districts. So big cities were getting $2 and $3 million to help with school reopening. We received $418,000. I do not think that that's how this next funding will be coming through. We are hoping that they will be relying on the data that we were submitting throughout the year, throughout the summer, in the survey collection of what our anticipated expenses are. So what I shared during our finance committee was basically the information that we shared through those surveys of truly trying to figure out what may this cost to open school safely. As Mr. Cannellan said, the largest number on this list of $4.4 million is $2.6 million of staffing. After seeing some of our initial survey results, we'll clearly know more when our new survey goes out tomorrow. But I can confidently tell you that we have no intentions of hiring 50 teachers in the next 3 weeks to help teach our students that are remote learners. We're going to work really hard to work with our existing staff to see how we can do that. That's not to say there may not be a need for some additional staff members, but clearly not in the amount of $2.6 million. In addition, the other large ticket item on this list was the transportation model, when we've been seriously considering, right up to the past 2 days, the half-day hybrid model at Southington High School. So if you take this estimated $4.4 million and reduce out the FTE for teachers, and you reduce the $550,000 in transportation, we're now at a $1.2 million number. So the good news is we know we have 1.9 essentially in the bank, per se, with the carry forward funds from last year. So I can confidently tell you that based on the conversations we're talking about right now and the types of expenses we're talking about right now, we have the funding available for that. What we were asking at the Finance Committee level was really to provide the administration the flexibility to take on and whatever expenses we need to have this safe reopening. And it's really difficult for me to sit here today to tell you exactly what we need in regards to FTEs for custodians or FTEs for nurses, because we truly believe it's going to be a combination of part-time, full-time. For an example, we have some part-time nurses. We're hopeful maybe some of those part-time nurses would be willing to go full-time. We may be able to hire an additional nurse or two. We might be able to look at the CNA model and hire individuals that could help us with the isolation rooms. We don't know what the market is out there for these applicants, that for what we will receive for applicants and be able to hire. In addition, with custodians, we're uncertain, if the part-time people can go full-time. Many of them have daytime jobs and they work part-time evenings for us. We're hopeful that we will be able to hire some full-time custodians that will be able to work during the days in the school to really do those heavy touch, often touch point cleanings that we need. What I can share is I've been in negotiations and conversations with both the nurses union and the custodial union to work with them so that their current recognition clause requires anybody working 20 hours or more to be part of that bargaining unit. They have both in principle have agreed that they're willing to waive the recognition clause for this year only to hire interim people that would not be covered under the bargaining unit, and therefore not have all of those additional expenses and benefits that come along with these positions. I've also was able to work with the administration for MERS that these individuals would not be covered under the Municipal Employee Retirement System, saving another 14% on the wages that these individuals would earn if they were working over 20 hours a week. So we're trying to work hard to mitigate the cost of the payroll that would be associated with these individuals, and also, when we are able to hire them, put language in their letters of hire that their employment is contingent upon school being open. Because if we go remote, positions like custodians and nurses, we would not need these individuals on a daily basis. Barring an executive order requiring us to pay staff like we received in the spring, our hope would be that we'd only be paying these individuals for hours actually worked. So that kind of talks about the first three categories. Food service, we have a lot of work to do in there with the hybrid model. We know that at the elementary, we are looking at transporting meals to the classrooms. Who's going to do that? Some of the cost incurred with coolers that we need to keep the products cold or hot to get to their rooms, get to their classrooms at the appropriate temperatures. You see on here the bus monitors. We have basically tried to do a math exercise of how many monitors would we need if every bus, and paying those individuals for the 2 weeks. This calculation was under the assumption that we'd have monitors at every level. So that's probably the highest dollar amount that could possibly be. Some additional time for our paraeducators. We need to social distance arrival and dismissal at school. We tried to put in something in regards to what those additional costs could be. I think Mr. Medancy did an amazing job outlining the additional technology expenses that we anticipate incurring. The transportation I've already discussed, minor amount in training that we need to do for a safe reopening, and then we certainly did need to buy additional furniture and supplies in order to appropriately social distance. I could tell you that our administrators did an amazing job of going around classroom to classroom with their custodians, counting desks and saying, if we're going to take out 5 desks from this room and move these to the science room because we can no longer use the science tables and the stools to social distance, how many desks can we take from every classroom so that we're not buying additional desks to outfit middle school science rooms and those types of things. So everyone's really been amazing in trying to assist Mrs. Mella and myself in determining what this looks like and cost out an estimate to have before you tonight. So really at this time, the Finance Committee understood the unknowns and the flexibility needed, that we would be utilizing the 2% carry forward, or non-lapsing, I'm sorry, potential grant funding that we will certainly share with you tomorrow as soon as we know what that dollar amount may look like. But we're confident to at least start the year, based on this plan that you have in front of you, that we can make that happen.
So, if I may make a comment to Mr. Darrenowski, to go back to your question previously, as Ms. Dinella, so thank you so very much for explaining that. It's really an unknown number at this point, okay?
Yep.
Now, if you would like us to have another meeting previous to the beginning of the school year, I would assume we can do that, Mr. Kennelly, correct? But to give a definitive answer right now, I think is impossible, Sherry, is that right? Really, it is. So, I mean, you know, we look, it looks to me, who's not that great with figures, that we could be okay, depending on what the state gives us, but we just don't know. We just, at this point, don't know. Is that
Yes,
fair?
and I've had the pleasure of working with Mr. Darrenowski for a number of years in the Finance
Right.
Committee, and he never disappointed me in the conversations of always saying,
Right.
this sounds great, I like what you want to do, but what is that going to cost, and wanting to be sure that we had a plan of how to fund that. So I'm hoping this evening that I was able to put your concerns to rest a little bit, knowing that the savings, and I don't want to call it a surplus, it's really the savings that we had in the 1920 budget because of the school shutdown is why we have this additional dollars and why we were very fortunate to be able to fund that $1.9 million account.
And I understand the need for flexibility.
Mhm.
Because there's a lot of things that need to be done. And again, we only have a few more weeks before
Correct.
things have to be in place. We don't have another meeting, and that having another meeting may help, but to wait for that is gonna kind of hinder the ability to get things done quickly.
Yes. We'd like to post jobs tomorrow morning for custodians and nurses.
Right, so in lieu of not having that, I mean, I'd be willing to, I mean, we've got, what, $1.9 million roughly? Allocate that money, okay, or authorize the administration to spend up to that amount of money so that they can get things planned, get things started in the event that, you know, time is of an essence to get things in place before school starts. Does that make sense?
Yes, Bob?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, that we, because they're gonna need word of our approval to move forward.
Right.
So I think we do what Dave suggested, say yes with that caveat. I would also like to request we still have that meeting, not that we're gonna vote on new things, but I don't know
Information,
about
just
you, I think
information.
today, we've learned a lot, and we've put a lot out for the public to hear.
Okay.
I think we're gonna need that, because I'm gonna be honest with you, 2 weeks from now, it ain't gonna be the same. So
You want-
not that we
alright.
necessarily have to vote on things at that meeting, but just more for information, because it's gonna be different. And you got
I
the
will
sports
work
thing
on
to deal
that.
with and
I
all
will
these
work on
things.
that with Mr. Cannell and
But I
to come
think
up
we
with a
do move
date.
forward, otherwise, as Dave said,
Well,
Okay, I will work with,
in that regard, I would move to authorize the administration to allocate up to that 1.9 or 1,963,779, you know, to be spent for, you know, items such as that have, you know, that were identified here.
Okay.
You know, for the opening of school.
so we need a motion for that, Dave, yeah?
He just
Okay.
made the motion.
No.
You can't spend money without a
You
motion.
just,
he made the motion. I'll second the motion.
but okay, and we will work,
Bob did.
Brown.
all in favor?
You're very well.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And we will work for it, I don't
just
know when
think
our next meeting is, I don't
information-wise
think
and the
it's
changes,
until
it's-
September, I don't have my
September
calendar.
10th.
I'm very supportive of that. I think that's, I mean, we
Okay,
really-
Mrs. O'Shana, continuing, please, I know you
Okay.
have to leave.
Okay, so, one of the items that we discussed was the award of bid 2020-019. It's the replacement of the high school auditorium lighting system, which the lighting system that's in there now is the original system that was in there when the building was built 34 years ago. The board voted on this project to move it forward as part of the vote taken at a previous meeting to look at some of the unexpended funds and it was one of the projects that was listed that we voted on to move forward with that was then sent to the finance board to, and they approved it to move as part of the list that we put together. the project went out to bid, and after the project went out to bid after the vote was taken to move that forward, and this is on the agenda tonight to look at, to review, and then to vote on. There was discussion at our meeting to say, okay, well, with all of the items going on right now and questions regarding the return to school and the costs that are associated with that, should this project move forward now or should we put it on hold? So there was a lot of discussion about that at the meeting. In the end, the consensus of the group, of the Finance Committee, was to move forward since the funds have been set aside, and with the expectation, some of the information we heard tonight, where, if my math is right, we had the 1.963 million, and the expectation now we need 1.2, so there's about a $763,000 differential. Again, there's still some questions what the ultimate numbers are, but we got about $763,000 of that unexpended funds still after spending the money to get the safe school reopening. So this was, the award is, I'd like to make a motion, then we can discuss it. The motion to award RFP 2020-109, or 019, excuse me, for replacement of the high school auditorium lighting system to SuperTech Inc. as presented.
Second.
Discussion, or any, and
So at the meeting, I was sort of the, again, I guess the more cautious of the members. So my concern is, as of right now, and just taking a couple notes, we're throwing away around terms like hoping that we get certain funds, anticipating. If history serves us well, sometimes the state of Connecticut doesn't always come through as to what we're expecting. This is a $250,000 project that I can't stress enough the near and dear to my heart what the performing arts is and everything else. Is this the right time? Looking at the current documentation as to how we're going to have to open schools, there's no way we're going to be able to do any productions in the auditorium in the very near future, and there's really no. I don't see us being able to use this for at least a year while everything sort of settles out. My thought process was that because this is a one-time expenditure project, because our coffers are already full, essentially I would assume that this money would then get kicked back. Whatever we don't spend is going to get kicked back and put into the general fund on the town side?
No, this account is able to, this is the non-lapsing account from year-end 2019, and it is
Okay.
set aside and can carry forward year to year.
Okay.
We request it that it's carried forward year to year until we fund the project. So no, this
Okay,
account
so
is not
this
expiring.
stays with the Board of Education then?
It's under the auspices of the town budget with a specific line item under your discretion, as you had already voted for the projects that would be funded.
Okay. So even better. So with that being said, I'm just concerned about pulling the trigger on this project right now. I'm not saying that we're not going to do it in 6 months, but going back to Dave's points of there's a lot of what ifs right now. $250,000 is FTEs. That's a lot of supplies. Again, like I just don't.
this was already voted on by the board.
I understand that,
You'd
but
have to rescind that vote. You'd have to make a motion to rescind a vote that was previously made by the Board of Education to negate that.
and I'd be willing to do that because I'm
And it would
concerned
have
enough.
to pass by, I think it's a 2/3 vote, is it?
Correct,
Could I make
Correct.
a suggestion?
Am I right about that?
correct.
They want to make a
Can I make a suggestion? If we are going to have another meeting before our next meeting, or before the opening of school, excuse me, and we're going to have better understanding of the numbers,
We'll table
Well,
this.
yeah.
yeah, I think if we were to table this, and the reason I suggest that is I'd hate to see it die tonight, because not only is this something that's, I mean, you're right, I don't think we're going to be seeing a lot of things going on in the auditorium.
I
The
agree
problem is if we
100%,
don't
Dave.
do it now when we have the funds set aside for it, I don't think we'll ever do this.
No, we won't.
Right.
That's,
And
that's
what I
exactly
see
right.
this as is two questions, 2 points. One, it's a safety issue. Truly, it is a safety issue with the electrical systems. Having seen them and worked on them before, they're pretty ugly back there. But secondly, it's also part of. It's not just performances. It's actually
Curriculum.
part of. It's co-curricular. So
Oh,
the
right, it's
band gets
curriculum.
credit for the performances that they do in there. I believe there's some credits also for the drama gets credit. Correct. So these are credited courses. It's not like an
Right, it
extracurricular.
is. It's
So
curriculum.
instead of saying no this evening, I'd like to, maybe what we do is we table this evening, go over the expenses at our next meeting where Mrs. Danello has a better understanding of where we are, a very close period to opening up, and then we take this up again.
Well, our next scheduled meeting, I'm not that our next board ed meeting is September 10th. And today is what, the 11th?
Today's the 13th.
13.
Oh,
So the-
13th, I'm sorry,
Board of
13th. So that means,
If we were, Mrs. Carmody, may I interrupt for a minute?
sorry, what?
I said, may I interrupt for 1 minute?
Yes,
If we were to do another Board of Education meeting, as Mr. Darrenowski or Mr. Brown suggested, 2 weeks down the road would be September 3rd. So we could do another Board of Education meeting on September 3rd, and I think Mrs. Danello indicated that would be sufficient time for us to have a little better idea of where we're.
okay, September 3rd.
Is that
It's
accurate?
actually the 27th, isn't it, of August?
What, the 3rd is 3 weeks? Did I count wrong?
Yeah,
Two weeks
it's
and
the 27th of August,
Yeah,
Oh, 27th is 2 weeks? Oh, yeah, you're correct. Yep.
I think. Looks like.
Okay,
But I mean, we could.
But we will, I mean,
I stand corrected.
so we are anticipating hearing what our so-called a dollar amount is that's
I
coming
think
from
we
the
should
state
just go on
tomorrow.
with that.
Right.
So, I mean, knowing that we have the 1.9 and that there are supposed to be additional dollars, I think we really would love to get this project done, obviously. And so if pushing it off 2 weeks so that we hear if there's additional funding coming to the town in regards to assisting us with a safe reopening, I think makes a lot of sense.
Now,
Mr. Kennellan, if I may ask you as a parliamentarian, since I want to make certain that I get this correct, this was a motion that was passed by the Board of Education last year or the year before, correct?
Correct. So you've got two,
Approval of purchasing these lights was already approved by the Board of Education, correct?
correct,
Last fall.
correct,
So we already had that approved. So to
correct,
rescind that, what has to happen?
correct. But can I, because I'm not sure that's exactly where we're going with this.
Rescinding it, we're putting it off?
sign a contract that we get a better handle as to exactly what we're gonna be faced with.
Okay.
Because if we have to rescind it to be able to find another $250,000 to then, come to find out that we're not getting as much money as anticipated.
Okay, so we can do
I
that
wanna have
legally?
that ripcord that we could pull at the beginning of the school year to be able to have that fluid.
Correct. So you've got two issues. You've got a motion on the floor, a motion that was seconded on the floor, and then in the course of discussion, what Mr. Bachewski is saying is to delay action on that particular motion.
Okay.
So
Right.
can I make a?
Well,
Dave, Dave has a question.
The funds were originally approved for this project. It went out for bid. Now we're looking to approve a motion to award the bid.
Right,
The project has already been approved.
right.
I think, and I agree with Joe, I think in light of the unknowns that we have, I would feel more comfortable, putting this on hold,
Right.
okay, tabling it either to the next meeting
Right.
or at some future point when we have a real good feeling that we're on good, sound financial footing, and then approve the bid.
But do you think by September, what did Tim say for a meeting? The
20
3rd
August
or the
27th.
27th? You think we're gonna really have a better feeling then?
for dollars.
We'll know
Tomorrow
the
how
grant
much
funding
money we're
tomorrow,
getting.
right? We'll know the
We
money
will.
from the state,
I
excuse me,
don't know.
tomorrow.
Get a lot of
We'll
information.
know, we'll know
According
better the
according to
funding.
the email we received today, we are supposed to hear
We'll know the
something in
funding.
regards to a dollar amount allocated
fine with
specifically
me.
to Southington.
So we
tomorrow.
can table it till the
We
next
could table it till the
meeting.
next meeting, and
Bring
then
it
if
up
we still
again,
don't feel
yeah.
we can table it to
Just
the next
table,
meeting.
fine
and-
with me.
So-
I'm just
so
asking.
Mr.
The money's not going anywhere.
Mr. O'Shannell would need to withdraw.
I will withdraw my
His
motion.
motion.
You withdraw your second?
And I withdraw my second.
And I'm gonna move to table, the award of RFP 2020-109.
Second.
So
Thank you.
that's fine with me. Fine, okay.
Have to vote on it.
Do we need to vote on that?
Vote on it.
All those in favor of tabling this?
Aye.
till A future meeting, which I don't know what date we put,
August 27th.
August 27th.
August 25th,
7th.
I love spelling.
7th.
That's
August
2 weeks.
2 weeks from now.
That's 2 weeks.
27th?
Mhm.
2/7.
Mhm.
27.
All right, so the next, did we vote?
We voted to.
Yes.
The next item we talked about was the organic waste program that the board voted to move forward with. Well, because of the social distancing that's gonna be going on, that we're gonna need to adhere to at the schools, the committee agreed that it was appropriate to delay the program until such time that it's actually feasible to do. So, that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna move that out into some point in the future. It's still a good program, we just don't, we won't be able to do it this year, so we're gonna move it out. And that is it.
Well, thank you, Mr. O'Shannon. Next we have, boy, what a personnel report. Before we approve, have a motion for this approval. What a job our Human Resources Department has had to do this summer. Lots and lots of work, and I'm sure there's even more coming. So I need a motion, please.
Move to approve the superintendent's report as submitted.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next on the agenda is town government communication. Any discussion there? Anybody?
I have nothing.
Bob, I don't know if you want to talk about the second reading for the citizenship course.
I'll make the motion, then if there are questions, I'll answer them, or maybe refresh your memories.
I think on the second reading, there are questions.
What's that?
No questions on the second reading.
Oh, okay. Then I'll make the motion, right.
Go ahead,
You
why
all
don't you
set?
make the
Yep.
motion?
Actually, the way it was worded, I'm not sure this is correct. It says, move to approve the second reading of the SHS citizenship curriculum as recommended by the Curriculum and Instruction Committee. I think we're,
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
aye.
So passed?
We're not,
Or so-
you understand what I'm
You're
saying?
approving the curriculum.
Yeah,
correct.
exactly. We're not approving the reading of it, we're approving the curriculum.
Yes.
Right.
Right, you can take that. portion.
Next we have the science
Fix it.
curriculum. If I could have a motion for that, please?
I move to approve the science curriculum for grades 4, 7, 8, and forensics as recommended by the Curriculum and Instruction Committee.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Who's second?
Joe?
Joe?
I did,
What's the
Dave
next
did.
one? I can't see here.
I think Joe
Um,
did.
Policy,
Policy
second reading.
3323, I can't see.
Move to approve the second reading for policy 3323, soliciting prices, bids, and quotations as recommended by the Personnel and Policy Committee.
Second.
Second. Oh,
All those in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Go ahead, Colleen.
Move to approve move to approve policy 5131.2, use of private technology devices by students as recommended by the Policy and Personnel Committee.
Second.
Is there a second there?
Yes, second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Move.
Okay, and the
Next one.
last one, Joe, do the last one.
Move to approve the second reading of the illustrative math units for grades 6, 7, 8 as recommended by the Curriculum and Instruction Committee.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And our last item this evening is the revised school school calendar for 2021.
Move to adopt the revised 2021 calendar, although I'd like to make a change.
What's your change?
With the change of October 12th as a school holiday, back to Columbus Day as a national holiday, as it's occurred on the 2021 calendar that we had previously approved. And that's second.
So your
Second.
motion is to,
Just keep the naming of Columbus Day on
which
October
it,
12th, which was
it does not
reflected in
appear
the.
that way now, it appears
Correct.
as school holiday.
Yep, that's the only change.
And I second that motion.
Is there anyone that wants to, second that
I
motion?
just second it.
Dave did.
I second it.
You
Yep.
second it? Any discussion?
So are we voting separately on the calendar and on that issue, or
You know what?
it's just one vote?
I don't know.
I'm asking.
You said with the change.
Okay.
With the change.
Are we voting, Mr. Kennellan,
He said that the motion was with the change, so it's the whole package.
the whole package? Okay, we're voting on the whole package, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any objections?
No.
I do have a can I just ask a question about
Yes,
that?
certainly.
It's not about the holiday. I know the state requires 900 hours. Is there discussion of changing that number or with everything that's going on?
Yeah, they've provided the State Board of Education already did that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Darrenowski, do you have something to say?
Your favorite one.
Your
Oh,
motion.
oh.
How could you forget?
I'm not anxious to leave.
He's refusing.
Sounds pretty good. Move to adjourn.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Ahoy.
Aye.
Broke my clip.
Why are you breaking your stuff? Very nice.